What is the best thing to do outside in North Dakota? What's your favorite?
So I can't pick favorites. I'm like, if there's a new candy bar for sale and it's like made from 50% dirt, I'll be like, honey, like, what if that's good? I gotta try it, Kayak, I love to kayak. I love to run. I love the fat tire bike now, which I
All right,
did.
but let's say you have
I know, but
one day.
I know.
And you're never gonna have another adventure again.
He does nothing because he can't decide.
I'm just
Is that
paralyzed.
Oh no, that is a curse. Our guest today, Tom Gerhardt, has been the face of news for over 20 years in North Dakota, but also is an adventurer at heart. All things North Dakota, things to do, fish, hike, run, bike. So thank you for being here. I'm excited to talk to you about all things adventure.
This is awesome. And, you and I have run cross paths so many times, swimming and doing all sorts of things, adventure related. So,
well, I grew up, obviously, like a lot of people my age, grew up watching you on the TV, like you every night. So you're a celebrity status in North Dakota for sure. There's no question. But I met you at the YMCA hot tub, which I don't know. We don't have to talk about that. But I was with friends and I was like, stop.
and at that time, my two oldest sons ended up swimming for Century High School. Yeah. But this was when they were in middle school or younger and wanted to get into swimming. And so I was doing my best to go with them and found out how poor of a swimmer I am.
Oh, no.
But so that's what we would go. We'd go do laps in the colder pool at the Y. And in fact, one of them started so young that they didn't want to let him do laps because he was too young, even though I was there and the pool was empty. So, But it was awesome. And then they went on both to swim and are still swimming to this day.
So have you been in North Dakota your whole life?
Yeah, I was born in Bismarck.
Okay.
And outside of a quick stint to the University of Minnesota in college, I've lived in North Dakota my entire life.
And so what's been your career journey? How did that begin?
So it's funny, like just about everybody in North Dakota, I did sports and growing up, loved basketball especially. And in high school, just kind of fell out of love with basketball particularly. And so I decided I didn't want to play, I think, after my sophomore year. And my parents were like, well, you need something else to do. So I remember my mom said, why don't you write for the school newspaper? And I thought, I don't know, okay. So for some reason, I don't know why, you look back sometimes at life and wonder why you take the steps you do. But I did, and the first thing I wrote, I remember, and we had a great English and journalism teacher. I went to St. Mary's High School in Bismarck, Daphne Gorbani, who's passed away, but she handed it back and she said, Mr. Gerhardt, this was excellent. And like, that was high praise from her, back everybody was intimidated by Ms. Gorbani. So it made me feel good about my writing journey. And so long story short, in the end, I started as writing for newspapers in high school and then college. And then Community Access TV started in Bismarck. And I think my parents, again, suggested, like, why don't you volunteer there? So I did that, and then I just fell in love with cameras and then just combining writing with audio and video, which ultimately led me to the University of North Dakota, where I was part of the Studio One internship program and had great mentors and fellow students that were terrific. And that led to a job, my first job in TV in Minot at KMOT TV doing weekend sports, which led to 23 years of television.
Wow. Okay, so in Minot then you're doing sports specifically?
Sports, well, so I was hired at that time, this is the 90s, early 90s, I anchored one sportscast a week, and that was Saturday night at 10. So this was before, we didn't have a website, I don't think, when I started in TV. And then Sundays came out of Bismarck. So KMOT and KFYR were affiliated. So KFYR sent up their news to Minot in that area on Sundays. And then, so Sunday and Mondays were my day off, but they hired me to, if there was a fire, I'd go record that. If there was a news story that someone didn't want to cover at night, a city commission meeting. But most of the work was sports. I didn't want to do news. I only wanted to do sports. But
sure.
Early on, I had had to do a few other things that I wasn't interested
Right.
in.
And then when you started it, I mean, news is different now, but then it was nightly, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was so different back then. And I've started to make references to things that younger people will be like, and I'll get some awareness, like, they're not getting my references. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. I can't make old movie references. So it's hard to put yourself in that place in 1993. But then the 6 and 10 news were appointment viewing. I mean, people watch the news. There was no streaming or internet. Like,
so because of that, getting straight out of college and your first job there, what is it nerve-wracking?
oh, I was so nervous.
Really?
It was terrible because in college I didn't get a lot of on-air. We didn't get a lot of on-air experience. So I was extraordinarily comfortable with the camera. But in fact, it was a couple of winters ago, we had an old VHS player in our basement, and my wife and I were upstairs, and the neighbor kids were over, and suddenly we could hear what sounded somewhat like my voice, and it occurred to me, like, oh, they've got old VHS. This is another reference nobody's going to get. They had old VHS tapes in this TV, and we're playing old sports clips of mine, old newscasts that I'd saved, and my wife and her mom went and looked, and they're like, oh my gosh, you sound like Jerry Seinfeld. So just jet black hair, and I'd get so nervous, and there'd be like 7 minutes of sports to get in a 5-minute window. Oof. And you might know, like, if you get your breath caught up and your voice kind of goes up here. So if you look I'm thankful there was no YouTube or Facebook when I started, because there were some embarrassing sportscasts, I would say, for sure. But yeah, my breath would get caught up, and I'd be talking as fast as I could just to try and get everything in. And Nolan knows, but I mean, when you're in news and your sports, you're kind of the buffer. So if weather and news go long, your sports gets cut. Or if weather and news go short, they're like, hey, you need to fill an extra minute or 2 minutes, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a lot. That's a lot at a newscast. So you had to be prepared to talk very slowly or sound like an auctioneer.
And so back then, are you relying on the teleprompter like Anchorman was? I mean, like,
well,
that kind of thing?
Somewhat, but in sports, what made it really interesting and one of the things I really loved about and I recognized about myself is I love like that energy. So we had what we called shot sheets. So if we went up to Hazen, if Hazen was playing Washburn, since I happen to know where you guys grew up in football, and Nolan was quarterbacking, and we'd say, hey, we were in Washburn tonight as the Cardinals took on Hazen. Let's go to the first quarter, and then you'd and then you'd have the shot sheet, which was all scribbled out, which my handwriting is terrible. And hopefully you could read your way through it, but no teleprompter there. But if you got your shot sheets out of order, or if somebody was talking in your ear, like, you got to hurry up. So there were a lot of moving parts, which made it really interesting. But it was like you'd work all day for 5 minutes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And if it didn't go well, I mean, or if it did, it was a high. I mean, it was just a surge of adrenaline.
Did you like that element of it?
I loved it. Yeah.
Were there moments where you're live and because of all that you're just like, this is a disaster, or you're humiliated or anything like that?
I remember KMOT is situated in Minot, and it's grown obviously, but we'd go outside and you could look over this valley to the west. And I don't remember the specifics, but I remember one night it went so poorly. Not as bad as some that you see on YouTube, but not to my standard. I remember looking over the valley, just questioning my life choices, just looking as the sun setting in the west of Minot, and just thinking, but I fought my way through it.
Could you have ever just thrown to a commercial? Did you have that authority? Like, this is going bad?
I suppose I don't recall ever doing that. And then when things, as technology progressed, so much of that became automated. I don't know what would have happened if we would have. I mean, so you're kind of out there, kind of, like the tightrope walker. I mean, kind of on your own.
Oh, I know even when I was doing it, if I would have just said, let's go to a commercial, they would have just ran it, but then we would have been off. And I would have been yelled at so bad. I do remember the first time I ever anchored sports, Tom was the news anchor. It was a Friday night, and I was filling in. It was my first time, and I had done a couple of practice readings on the teleprompter because teleprompter reading is different, and he ran the prompter for me. And our story was just middle of July. The only thing going on was like Packers training camp and Twins baseball. And I remember I had those two stories, but the video ran opposite.
Yeah.
So I was reading about Packers training camp, but Twins highlights were going. So I just looked up and I saw the monitor, and I go, "That's not Brett Favre." And I tried to kind of like brush it off.
Yeah. That's probably good.
They end up switching the video back to what I was actually talking about. We run it. I get through the Twins highlights. Tom goes, "Hey, you did great. Excuse me." He goes up to the control room. He's like, "Guys, we got a first timer. What are you doing to him?"
Poor kid.
Yeah.
And let's go back in the day again if we have some old time music to play. But when we first started and I eventually moved down to KXMB in Bismarck, and we had what we called a string tape. So everybody would have to load up their individual story all on one tape in order. And if something happened to that tape, the whole newscast would be. Oh. But there were times where, because deadlines are a thing in television news, like a couple of the stories would get out of sequence, and I mean, they'd have to stop, and there was some tough times.
Yeah.
Was that the beginning of technical difficulties?
Yeah, right.
But that's actually hard to imagine. Like I'm picturing you flubbing it up because you're a professional on just about everything. So that's really interesting. But there's other things that have gone really well. I mean, you lived through the Virgil Hill thing time.
Yeah.
Did you cover?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, just visiting with you guys kind of sprung some old memories, and I've been looking into it a little bit more. But when I was interning or volunteering at Community Access TV, which is now Dakota Media Access, if I got the name right, we interviewed Virgil a couple of times, and I believe my first press pass to one of the big fights at the Civic Center was through Community Access TV. And so, yeah, and then through sports, I mean, I remember talking to Nolan, going over to Mandan to the auditorium, and they had a ring set up, or maybe it was always there. And I remember him, getting to interview him and get video. And then when I was up in Minot, following him up there. So I was a part of several fights and documenting his journey early on, which was at that time. And we've been talking about it, just the energy surrounding those fights at the Civic Center. I just couldn't compare it to anything else I've ever experienced. I mean, North Dakota was so proud of Virgil Hill, and when he'd be running around the ring with the little North Dakota flag, and it built up through the Olympics. And I mean, he fought a lot in North Dakota, as you guys know, around the state, and built that fan base. And he was so good, with his fans. I think that.
Yeah.
Nothing will ever come to that. I can't imagine anything coming to that level anymore. And access at that time, I mean, you couldn't go to Facebook and see a video, or so. The only place you could see him was on the news, or in person, or in a magazine, or a newspaper article. So access points were so different. So when those pieces hit, or you got to interview Virgil Hill, that was a big deal.
Wow. So they were actually title fights in Bismarck, North Dakota.
Yeah.
And so that's people would come from anywhere just to watch that as it were. But then it's Virgil Hill, our kind of hometown guy, defending the title.
And I mean, you always hear like, "Oh, blow the roof off the place," but literally, it felt like that could happen. Didn't they say at a Taylor Swift concert recently that it registered as an earthquake?
Yeah, 2.3.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that happened back in the day. I mean, there was so much energy, and I don't remember if it was ABC, Wide World of Sports, whoever would come in to televise those fights, but it just had this atmosphere like nothing else North Dakota has ever experienced, or maybe ever will, just because, again, of how things were back then, so different compared to now. I just don't know if it would be as big of a deal. When you're underexposed, it just builds the storyline and the tension, and it was unbelievable.
That's awesome.
Where does that Virgil Hill run compared to other big memorable pieces that you've covered in sports, maybe?
Yeah,
There's probably plenty.
The thing
of
I
news.
enjoyed most about sports were the Class B, honestly, the Class B towns. And just because of the energy and how proud, kind of the same elements. People are so proud of their hometowns and their hometown colors that as far as like big things, they just didn't resonate the way authentically Class B sports resonated to me. So that was, I don't know. I mean, I got to interview Ty Murray, who was a 6-time all-around world champ cowboy, who he was a big, like the Michael Jordan of rodeo kind of back in the day. And at the Wiseman's Rodeo in Minot, that was super cool. Donnie Schatz was just coming on the scene. I remember we did a half-hour show on Donnie Schatz in Minot in his hauler.
He's still racing, isn't he?
And he's still racing. And at that time, he was just knocking on the door. And now he's, I don't know how many time World of Outlaw champ and Knoxville Nationals. And yeah, he started super young. So there are some great athletes and great stories, but I honestly don't think anything could compare to Virgil Hill because of the scope. I mean, of interest and energy. It's just unparalleled.
And that's kind of when you were still getting started into it.
Yeah.
But you got to cover.
Well, and then I mean, to be fair, and I was at least internally a little bit critical, and I don't know all the circumstances but then it was like, I felt like he held on too long at the end, and maybe he needed money. Maybe it's just a thing where you love it so much, which I can understand more as I get older. Like you don't want to let go of certain things.
Got a little gas left in the tank, maybe.
Yeah, and who cares if you win or lose if it's really what you're passionate about? But I don't know that I understood that 10 years ago. Now I think I have a different perspective on it. But
you're talking about The Last Stand, or
well, I mean,
just that he did
it felt like there were several where he just it might be a good idea to retire
before his first retirement.
Yeah.
I got you.
It just, I mean, I guess having experienced what was on the front end and then flipping that to the back end, I mean, there just wasn't as much interest.
So you're more of a Rocky 1 through 4 guy.
And I love this next, the next story that's on the horizon, or at least that chapter of, and I don't know if you guys have talked about it, but what he's doing now and kind of essentially,
it's awesome.
Yeah, helping running his own gym, right, and helping other fighters. So that kind of takes on that Rocky sequence where you transition to being the mentor,
mentoring creed.
Yeah.
And then you moved to Bismarck, right? Or you had been in Bismarck.
Yeah.
And a life in news a bit until, I don't know, when did you officially retire from news?
So the journey was Minot, Bismarck. And I left news. It's the only reason I remember is it was actually Thanksgiving Day in 2016. It was my last newscast. And it just had come to a point where it was time to try something else. And news life isn't great for family life. And I remember the thing after a while, when you have kids and you're married, you'd come home at night and your neighbors would bust out the coach's shorts and be sitting on their front porch throwing the ball around with their kids or whatever. And I'd come home and I'd have to keep my suit on, and sometimes you wouldn't make it home because there was a fire or a big press conference or whatever. And so it kind of finally ran its course, I think. But as we all know, it never leaves you.
Right. I mean, it's been 7 years or better part of a decade, and you're still the news guy.
It's funny, like over the 4th of July, we were up at Brush Lake and walking around behind some houses, and some guy I'd never met was looking at me, and he said, I know you, right? And so we got to talking, and so Yeah, he recognized me from the news, and that's, I mean, this is funny, and I've said it a lot, but this is literally something I heard at least a dozen times. People would come up to me just really genuinely and say, either, you know, you're in our living room every night, you know, or you're in our bedroom every night and they didn't mean it, but that's how
I go to bed
intimate
with you every night.
that's how intimate it was, at least for people.
You were telling good night to North Dakota.
I was putting people to sleep every night. Yeah, I mean, because you literally, it started to really connect with me that this is like people are letting you sort of through their front door into their house and trusting what you say. That's a pretty big deal.
And that's not true of news anymore, is it?
Well, I mean, this is another conversation, but I think what I wish we talked about more or differentiated was the difference between journalism and like news or information. Because I think there are so many points, you know, any one of us could write something and put it on Facebook, and it's not fact checked, it's not edited, it's not multi-sourced. So what is it? It's information. It could be news, but it's not journalism. And I think what we've let erode maybe societally is journalism. I mean, it's sort of like in the medical field, if we stopped going to medical doctors and just went to people who had, you know, opinions or researched, you know, how to repair your broken arm. But I think, I don't know, it's not just one side that is all to blame, but I think as a society, we have to wear some of where we're at, because you kind of get what you deserve. And if journalism was important enough to us, I think we'd have higher standards in the information that we.
So what, and this might be a stupid question, but what is that line that separates journalism from just newsy stuff? Is it schooling?
Well, I mean, I think education's part of it, but I think, you know, kind of some of the things I just said, you know, do you have two sources on a topic? Is it balanced? Am I just coming to interview you on how great triathlons are, or am I going to go talk to somebody else who says, well, you know, you got to be a good swimmer, or it could be dangerous, or whatever, you know what I mean? So, I mean, balance, trying to present both sides of the story, having someone edit your copy. If you make a mistake, correcting it, because I'm not sitting here saying journalism's perfect, but it's out. That was the thing about our job, is if we made a mistake or we did something right, everybody could see it. Most people work at their desk or behind the scenes and don't have cameras on them, or if you work for a newspaper, it's in print, it's right. Mm-hmm. It's going to live in front of, well, not anymore.
Yeah.
It's in front of you. So I think there's just a lot of information going out now that maybe doesn't have both sides of the story, or try to represent both sides of the story, that isn't vetted, that doesn't have multiple sources, that is just like, oh, I'm going to go talk to Tom about whatever he wants to talk about, and I'm not going to have anybody edit it.
Do you think there's a way back to journalism? Because if we as a society have kind of gone down the social media route instead, or just whatever, is that a future still?
I would say it's possible, but it's not the direction we're headed in. I am I'm on the board of what's called the North Dakota News Cooperative, because I still am passionate about journalism and think it's really important, it's really important to our society. And the North Dakota News Co-op, about a year ago, we hired one writer who's been producing about maybe a little over a story a month on topics of statewide interest, and making that available to newspapers, but also you can go to the website and read the stories for free, and they're more in depth, but they have all the things that, all the elements I just talked about, you know. But again, you can't expect perfection out of a journalist, just like maybe any other profession. People are going to make mistakes, but do you own up to them?
Right.
You know, do you try and correct them? What's your starting point? And that was one thing I think that spoke to me about journalism, is whatever I thought about something, I never put that out there. I think trying to find some elements of truth is really important to me.
Did you expect that journalism would be as polarizing as it is now? Or has it always been?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a lot of ways, if you go back into, even look at propaganda during wars and things like that, like I think it probably in some ways has always been that way, but it definitely occupied a higher level of importance
Sure.
and maybe even reverence in some ways. And when you go back to, again, maybe too old of references like Walter Cronkite, Eric Severide, who was from Velva, North Dakota, was extremely influential writer and news broadcaster on the world stage on significant events. But it's so fragmented, and clearly it'll be interesting even now, but 10 or 15 years from now, to see how our brains have changed to the constant stimulations. And
Yeah.
when you say, how many times do you look at your phone in a day, 300 or 800 or whatever? I mean, we're so conditioned now to not, whether we're aware of it or not, I think to headline read and not read the story,
Right.
or just want a 10-second video and not a 3-minute video. So I want to retain some optimism and hope. I don't want to let all hope go, but it's certainly we're not going, we're going downhill, not back up the hill.
And through your career, you've always had this kind of parallel, like you're an adventure seeker. You love the outdoors. I know that about you, and you've done races.
Yeah.
When did all that start?
So that all, I think, it all came from my dad, who loved, we grew up fishing and hunting, camping every weekend, literally
Awesome.
almost every weekend when I was a kid. And got to the point where my mom, we had a StarCraft pop-up camper. I can still hear the when we put it up and pull out the ends. And we were out in some pretty bad storms, and my mom finally put her foot down and said, no more of that. So they ended up buying this old house in Pollock, South Dakota, just over the border on the Missouri River, and fixed that up through the years. But that was our getaway, about an hour and a half south of Bismarck. And so we grew up a lot, oddly enough, being from North Dakota, just across the border in South Dakota. But yeah, my dad, he was a recovering alcoholic, went into treatment in 1969 at the age of like 25. People thought he was crazy. I don't think they understood addiction really back then. And he got sober. I was born shortly after. And then he ended up being pretty much a lifetime drug and alcohol counselor at Heartview. But he definitely had that persona that if he was all in on stuff. So he started running, I think, when I was in 7th grade or so. And I don't really remember why, but I remember trying to run with him, and I did sometimes. But we did do a father-son race one weekend back in the 80s, a 5K, and I made it. And I remember there's an old picture of us somewhere, and that kind of seeing him, and he did, I think, 11 marathons and Winnipeg and Hawaii and
Wow.
all over. And so he was all about it. And just, I think seeing that just really for my sister and for me really resonated. And so I think when I was working in Minot, I would run. And so probably 20 some years ago, I kind of started taking it more seriously. And then my parents pivoted. My dad quit running in his 50s, and they bought bikes, and these old Gary Fisher mountain bikes.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, and this is a great story too, they bought these Cannondale touring bikes from Dakota Cyclery at the time, and ended up doing the entire Lewis and Clark Trail on bike, I think over 3 summers. They did what was the Candice out of Fort Stevenson multiple times. I mean, they put on thousands of miles on these bikes. And so just my dad just had this great adventurous spirit, and he'd pull my mom in, and she would love it once she got going on it. But my dad passed away a few years ago, and I decided that I kind of wanted to start riding bikes. So he still had his old Cannondale bike, and I took it to Lance Larson Cyclery in town, and they kind of tuned it up and gave it back to me. And like the first 5 times I rode it, flat tires, bent chain. It's like my dad was like, I do not want you to ride my bike. But finally, Lance got it tuned up. But the first time I brought it in, he's like, I recognize this bike. And I was like, well, my dad, and he's like, I know your dad. Like, he's like, I built this bike with my brother. So at Dakota Cyclery, before he opened his own shop, and this is like a 20-year, 21, something like that, he recognized and actually had put these bikes together for my parents in like the year 2000. And then I was riding it, 20 years later, and just, yeah, unbelievable. It gave me chills when just the way he talked about it and remembering my dad. And so it was pretty cool experience then that I was able to ride that bike.
Yeah, to be able to remember that. I mean, these guys are making connections with the bikes as they build it. That's awesome.
Yeah, that spoke loudly to me about, it's not just a bike.
Right, and who your dad was.
And yeah.
That's awesome.
So anyway, that was great. And now I have a fat tire bike. I have a kind of a gravel touring, kind of go anywhere bike. I bought my wife a fat tire bike. So I've done, I think, 9 half marathons. I did the Bismarck Marathon in 2011, the flood year. Mm-hmm. And I had just decided, like, I'm going to do a marathon. And I'd started training, and about a month in, I had hired a trainer at the Y to help me out, just get me in shape, because I thought, I got to make this, And
this is your first ever?
First ever. I'd done a half marathon, probably just 1 half marathon. And I remember my trainer, Bernie. Do you remember Bernie from the Y? Anyway, she came up to me and she's like, yeah, they had to change the course. Because at that time, it was all flat. And that's along the river bottoms. And she's like, yeah, we're going up the hill.
Yeah.
And
we can say that in Bismarck. Everyone knows what it is.
The University of Mary Hill.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. Well, and that was a month or so in. And I'm like, I'm not giving up. But what she failed to say is that we were going up the hill twice, because it was a loop course. Mm-hmm. So when I found that out, but anyway, I made it. I did it. So
I was supposed to be on the relay team that year, and as soon as they switched to the hill, I tapped my brother. I was like, my brother will run with you guys.
Yeah, we're here for the flatness of the course.
Yeah.
Did you run up the hill? Did you?
I did.
Awesome.
So, in fact, I made it up the hill twice running. What actually took it out of me was coming down. So after coming down the second time, it kind of, my thighs were, and so I did walk a little bit on the back end, but oddly enough, the hill training, because in fact, one of my great running memories was I think my first 20 must have been my first 20-mile run when I was training. I was supposed to get up, I had it planned for a Saturday morning, and it was the night before, and I was still on TV, and then of course you're up late, and I'm like, I kind of want to go now. And my wife was kind of riding bike with me, and so she came with, and we took off. I don't know what time, 10 o'clock at night, maybe 10:30, and we got south of town in Bismarck on Burley Avenue, and it was dark, and there was like a heat lightning storm over the hill toward Mary. And it's pitch black down there at that time. But it was super cool, and went up the hill in the dark toward this, like, not bolt lightning, but again, kind of that heat lightning, and got to the top. And I think we got home at like 1:30 in the morning or something. And awesome. But did a lot of training on the hill. So the hill going up, oddly enough, didn't end up being the problem. But I made it, and that was the thing. And my dad was at the finish line with family, my mom too, and so that was super cool because he had done so many. So it was a great moment.
Do you like competing more or training more?
That's such a cool question because what I've learned is I love the journey. And I don't know, maybe like I don't know how many years ago I decided. And I don't even know why, but sort of when I got done with the run, I just try to relive it. Like, who did I see? What did I notice? What did I smell? It's still kind of a practice that I use today. And just, in fact, yesterday I went out did a 7-mile run. And I don't know if it's definitely like a getting older thing, but I just appreciate it so much. So, but I mean, I love competing. The energy, as you know, when you line up with other people is so cool. And everybody's got their own story, whether some personal thing that's motivating them or many personal things. And so I'm very conscious of that when I line up that people are out here kind of, working out their demons and doing things they never thought they could do. And that's so cool.
That practice that you mentioned, like you come back, is that an intentional thing that you do? I mean, do you journal it or do you just
maybe I should. I used to, when I first started running, we had these log books but I wasn't, I didn't have that perspective then, but yeah, it's very intentional. And like I said, I'm not sure why I started doing it, but it just kind of happened one time after a run. And I think
is it like a meditation?
I think it kind of is. And but I realized how much I enjoyed reliving and then how much more vivid it became. And so you're just not, because it's kind of fun to zone out a little bit. I mean, I kind of call it's kind of like mental yoga when you're on a bike for a long time or you're on a run. You just get into that space where you can work out your stress or whatever. But I think it just makes it more meaningful for me for some reason to sort of relive it and be conscious of what I experienced.
I suppose, then it causes you to think more about, oh, that's a good smell. Oh, that's a cool thought, rather than just zoned out and missing everything.
And it's not like a pressure thing. Before I start, I'm not thinking, okay, I have to be really alert. And in fact, I never think of it that way. It just sort of happens, and then when I'm done, I just go run through the whole course in my head again.
That's cool. I'm gonna start doing that. I need to do that. When you're lined up, though, for a race, then, is there a part of you, are you competitive?
Oh, yeah, I say I'm not, but I am, yeah.
So is there a part of you that's like, I could take these guys? And, that guy's definitely working through some demons, so I can get him.
So maybe it's hard to tell, but I don't have a runner's build. I'm built more like a linebacker or an offensive lineman, like I was in high school. So I'm a realist, but I was at the turkey trot last fall. I did take second in my age group, and I missed or third, excuse me, and I missed second by a second. So secretly, which now isn't a secret, I was pretty happy with that, and I was kind of like, okay, who can I? Yeah. But like, I'm 215 pounds or whatever, and a lot of my running friends are 160, or it's just a different experience. So I think when I look at my age and my build, I
was the same way doing bike races and stuff, and I'm a bigger guy, and I loved racing bikes, but I'd hear people talking behind me on the bike, and they'd be like, "Oh, this is nice." Because I'm just carrying them through. They can just tuck in behind and draft a few people behind me. Like, oh, come on. Yeah. So I'm not built for that either, but love it.
Yeah. So, I'm competitive, but I think it becomes more of and I think the community is so supportive. Maybe if I was really fast, maybe then everyone isn't so nice. But my experience in biking and running is just such a supportive and encouraging community of people.
Yeah. It's really funny. There's a lot of similarities. My upbringing and your upbringing, including Pollock. That's where my family's from on my dad's side. My dad has always done races since I grew up. That's how I got into it, watching him compete in triathlon, like Melanie Carvel. Like that name is a big name in my household because you'd win every race, the girl beating all the guys. And but he did a half Ironman in Hawaii, and there's a big field of like professionals that I was into triathlon enough that I knew the names. It's like really cool. And my dad did it, and I think in his mind he was maybe thinking, he's a realist too, but I think he was thinking maybe I could get some of these guys. And he had finished in the top half. He was like finished. He's an incredible swimmer in the ocean. It was just fun to watch, and he did great. But I think the competitive side of him was like, I think I could be in the pro field. That was when I was in college too, so he'd been doing it for years.
Maybe, I don't know what points you're at, but kind of competing against yourself or as I grow a little bit older. I mean, my number one thing is I just want to remain active. So it's great if I do well, but it's more competing against myself, I think, now. But yes, if I do, happen to do well, I don't mind passing.
Well,
people.
these are races that are like the accomplishment is finishing it.
Right.
First.
Yeah,
I mean,
for the half Ironman. Yeah.
for a half Ironman or even,
Ironman.
I mean, a marathon, the reason the marathon's a race is because the body's not meant to go that far.
Yep.
So an Ironman's just pushing it even farther, so the goal is to just get there. And, but then to be able to even be in the conversation about being competitive is just, that's
a
next
whole nother,
tier.
yeah.
Those people are cool, but they're freaks,
Yeah. And it's funny, Melanie Carvel, when I was thinking about, and now we were talking earlier, and I think I have a friend who's doing a half Ironman and trying to get me back interested in triathlons. But several years ago when we met at the Y, I was swimming with my boys, and I was thinking I would try a sprint triathlon. And one of the first people I called was Melanie Carvel, and I remember going to the Y, and she was just going to give me a little swimming lesson, and I remember she's like, well, go down and back. And I remember I
went
went down
in front of you.
I know, I didn't want to, and I did, and then you know how nice she is.
Yeah.
I'd really like to know, because she's like, oh, honey, that was really good, And I wonder inside, she's like, oh my, there's no chance, there's no hope, and then she helped me with, I changed my running stride years ago to make it like a quicker turnover.
Chi running.
That I didn't ever exactly do that, but yeah, like the beat per minute, and then this whatever the shoes Newtons. Yeah, I didn't ever get Newtons, but I did learn there's no need for me to lift these super heavy legs high up into the air. Let's just keep them low to the ground.
What did you look like when you were running?
I'll tell you, one of the you talk about seeing yourself, and if you ever run on the north side of the Y in Bismarck as you're coming on Divide. Those memes of, how you look versus how you think you look. Yeah. I remember, you'd be out running and you think, I'm tough. And you'd go up that little hill as you're going west to east. And I remember getting up there one day and looking over and just feeling good about myself and how I look in my head. And I remember looking at my reflection. I'm like, oh, I'm never running on this street again in public. That looks horrible. Unhook a plow. Yeah. So
people might pass and say, "Oh, it looks like he's having fun. It looks like he's enjoying himself."
Right. He looks delirious.
Yeah, it's all about confidence.
That's right.
And then the Medora is huge in North Dakota. I mean, everyone has gone to Medora and things. You're involved with Medora, but what's Medora mean to you?
Yeah. So to me, oddly, it means very, very similarly what it meant to Theodore Roosevelt. And that was a place that he escaped to kind of heal and regroup. And I don't know if you can see, I have a tattoo on the inside of my arm of Theodore Roosevelt's Elkhorn Ranch brand, which is a copy of the actual brand that he had for that ranch. And it's just always been a place where I could go to escape. And generally, I'm pretty outgoing, but I need time to recoup and just kind of be away. And so that's what it's meant to me. And then through an odd series of events, Shyla Schaefer, I got really close with her, and she was so good to my kids and me, and that just kind of elevated the experience, because before that it was typically outside of Medora. I mean, of course we went to the musical and all those things growing up, and but yeah, it's just a big playground that I have a lot of reverence for, because it's just such a majestic place.
Teddy Roosevelt went there after the death of his wife and daughter.
Yeah,
is that right?
same. Yeah, he wrote in his diary a big black X, and I think something to the effect of, "The light has gone out of my life." They died the same day, and he eventually came west to hunt buffalo and got off the train to do so in the late 1800s, and fell in love with the place, and eventually had 2 ranches, but the one that was most meaningful was he had the Maltese Cross Ranch, which he said was too close to town, and it's too busy, too many people. So he went, followed the Little Missouri north, and the Little Missouri flows north until he came to this place along a riverbank with cottonwoods and just beautiful. And he found 2 elk horns interlocked. They must have dueled to the death. And he decided he was going to build his ranch, secluded ranch at that place. And so he brought 2 woodsmen from Maine out to chop trees and build his ranch. And that was like his home ranch in the Badlands. And you can visit it. It's the 3rd part of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. It's a small place. Have either of you been out?
I've been there one time.
Yeah. So it's hard to get to, but it's extraordinarily beautiful and remote and secluded, and you can kind of get a sense of, he knew every bird sound and could identify just about everything. Right. And so that's kind of been a meaningful retreat for me and friends and family through the years, just kind of reset.
And you're on the board?
Not anymore.
Okay.
No, but I was on
been?
the board of directors for the foundation for
Okay.
several years. Yeah.
And the Mattahey Trail goes right through there, and you've done that. I don't know if it's in its entirety, but
not in its entirety. No, I've done bits and pieces and hiking and
right.
My first experience was I stripped the headset on a mountain bike I had like very early on, like early 2000s. Didn't make it very far. Had no idea what I was doing out there. I don't even know if I had water. And, went through some rutted cow hoofed terrain, and just like my headset was my handlebars, so I had to walk my bike back, and it was 9,000 degrees out. And so that was my introduction. And that's the thing about, I'm sure you have the same experiences in North Dakota. Mother Nature, you realize at a very young age, especially if you spend any time outside, like to honor and respect Mother Nature, because you never know what's going to pop up.
But you learn
North
that
Dakota
through making those mistakes.
Right, right.
Our first time on the Mattahey was with Huffies, the Walmart bikes.
Oh, yeah.
And just like absolutely broke them.
Yeah.
Like the bike broke.
Similar experience.
And so you're out there and like, okay, now I respect this.
Yes.
Or been out with 2 flat tires, brought 1 spare tube, not 2.
Not 2.
So gonna hike it out for 8 miles. So, but you learn those things as you go.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, and the smells and the sights. It's just, the jagged buttes and the
Which
colors.
you remember.
Oh yeah, and
I never do that.
Yeah. And I've done the 1 half marathon on the Mattahey Trail, which was a week ago from today.
Yeah.
The most recent series.
You just did it?
No.
Okay.
A couple of years ago.
Yeah, but
that race. Yeah.
Yep, the Mattahey race series.
Want to get back out there for another.
You gonna do it?
Well, I'm sure at some point. Yeah, I'm happy they started the race an hour earlier, because the heat sometimes out there has been
right
tough.
So what is the best thing to do outside in North Dakota? What's your favorite?
So part of my blessing is my curse, and I can't pick favorites. I'm like, if there's a new candy bar for sale and it's like made from 50% dirt, I'll be like, honey, like, what if that's good? I gotta try it, So I don't know if I could pick one. Kayak, I love to kayak. I love to run. I love the fat tire bike now, which I've done for a few years. I love getting out on gravel roads with bikes.
All right, but let's say you have
I know, but
one day.
I know.
And you're never gonna have another adventure again.
He does nothing because he can't decide.
I'm just
Is
paralyzed.
that right? Oh, no, that is a curse.
No, I mean, somebody asked, my niece, I think, asked me yesterday, do you like running or biking better? And I think just because the running goes back so far, and the initial connection to my dad, I think if I had to pick one thing, although running is never easy, it's always, enjoyable, but it's like work, I'll go do that.
Where?
Oh, good question. Well, I do have one thing I have become about 5 or 6 years ago now. I decided I'm never running on a treadmill again. So I run outside year round, and I have a little video. I think I ran around the zoo last winter when the wind chill was 35 5 below.
Doesn't that hurt?
No, I mean, you just gotta get the right stuff, right? So,
And that's another thing that you learn by doing.
yeah, I know how I can do it.
Yeah.
now. So I mean, since we're talking about the Maadahay and it's so beautiful, maybe I would pick that.
Where?
But
I mean, like, where would you get on? We're gonna come up with like Tom Gerhardt's 5 best things to do in North Dakota.
well, I would. So I've hiked between like the Elkhorn and Wanigan. Maybe there, just using that as a central point because that's such a meaningful area to me.
Yeah.
Probably there.
Awesome.
But Devil's Pass, I mean, they're in China Wall. I mean, there's so many beautiful places. North Unit is so extraordinary. But most of my time has been spent on the south, in the South Unit, Magpie, Elkhorn, Wanigan,
Yeah.
Bennett. I've been up to Bennett. It's all awesome. But
Right.
I would,
And people who are listening, they can find all this stuff through Nikki Barra's Maadahay race series. So just search Maadahay or Adventureland in North Dakota, and you can find all these beautiful spots on the 110 mile plus now.
plus, right?
Yeah. Single track in
Yeah,
Western North
and I mean,
Dakota.
I'm really conscious too of it just feels like you're literally walking in the footsteps of history, all the history that's come, from.
Have you always been a Teddy Roosevelt guy, or did that come after you had an
No,
experience there?
I think, I'm trying to recall, but I read the book The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, which is extraordinary and chronicles. There are 3 books in the series Edmund Morris wrote, who's now passed away. But after I read that and I read these specific connections to North Dakota, that story began to resonate with me more, but particularly in that Elkhorn Ranch, the way that it was written about, I just had to visit. And so I remember, I think I still have a copy of the story on video, but maybe 2003 or 2004, I went out there and hauled, and Nolan would remember, like I had the 3/4 inch camera and the deck and the multi-pin cable and heavy batteries, and the tapes are like almost half the size of a pizza box, and you had to hike in. It's about a half or 3/4 mile hike from where you can park into where the foundation stones are for the old ranch, and did a story and was just inspired. And at that time, the park, I'm trying to think of his name now, but anyway, the interpreter was giving me this history, and he said when the author came to when the author wrote about Roosevelt's experience in the Elkhorn Ranch, he hadn't been there yet. So when he actually physically came to the space, he said he was so overcome with emotion because it was so beautiful. He said Morris fell to his knees and wept.
Wow.
And so I think it's there's certainly history before Roosevelt was in that area, but I think and he's a complicated figure in history, but had some extraordinary things about him. And so that's where that connection started, was I think particularly from that book, and then from visiting that area for myself and realizing, and back in that time too, like when you drove out of town, nobody could get a hold of you. So that was awesome.
Yeah. Even still over there, it's a little tricky.
So it was like, I can get away from everybody in the office for a day.
Did you have a similar experience? I mean, maybe not on your knees, but that this is a sacred place?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think I still feel like that, an overwhelming sort of spiritual sense in the Badlands from multiple perspectives. But I think that consciousness again of just everything, the sights, the smells, the sounds, just how you're sort of alone and able to think, and but enjoy this extraordinary beauty, and it's challenging when you're actually on the trail. I mean, there's just a lot of things about it that speak to me.
Someone who maybe has lived in North Dakota their whole life, but has an interest in this stuff, but doesn't know where to begin. Do they just grab a Walmart bike and go to the Maadahay, or what do you recommend? Like what adventure is accessible in North Dakota? Maybe to just like dip your toes in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that even in Bismarck, just finding, I think you just got to be willing to be uncomfortable a little bit and ask people. But one in Bismarck, I mean, I think, behind Bismarck State College, there are some trails, and I remember walking there and then eventually running and then taking my mountain bike, and then the Missouri River Trail on the Mandan side is a great place to get off the pavement, and just finding those places, Harmon Lake, which is north of Mandan, just finding those places and just being okay. It's sort of like going back to my first time on the news. You could be paralyzed with fear, wondering what about the mistakes you're going to make or what everyone's going to think of you, or you can just try it and incrementally get better and seek advice, and people are willing to help. And when I was on the board in Medora, that was one thing we talked about. I don't think it's obvious to people coming to town where to get on the trail. I think we can do a better job of pointing people in those directions. I know there are plans maybe to try and get an outfitter out there at some point as the library's being built. There's certainly going to be more people coming through town. There's going to be a need to grow services and opportunities for people out there. And the new point-to-point trails that they have are really accessible, where you can still see town but feel like you're out of town. I think
so if you get into trouble, you can kind of
I think that's it. And I think those are great starting points to build your comfort level and to get a taste of things. So I think,
it might not be comfortable.
And I think that's what you have to be. And that's, I don't know. I mean, we've all heard that. That's where growth happens, right? I mean, if you just do the same thing all the time and don't challenge yourself, you're not gonna be open to new experiences, and some of those are gonna be awful, but some are gonna be amazing. And so I think just being willing to try new things and get out of your comfort zone is really important.
Just find a trail and
find
move.
a trail and move. That's, that goes back to the old. I talk about this a lot, and in recovery, it's that one day at a time or one step at a time. And so this overwhelming sense that I got, growing up with my dad being a counselor and recovering himself, was like, you just got to keep moving. And I think that's just a lifelong lesson, whether you're recovering from something, alcohol or drugs, or just in general, because we all have stuff, right? So
right. And it's about the journey.
It's about the journey. I think that's, if you get to the finish line too fast,
Yeah. So what's next on the journey for Tom Gerhardt?
Yeah, great questions. I have started ramping up. One thing I've always wanted to do is run at least the same amount of half marathons that my dad ran in marathons. And so I've started ramping up my running miles here a little bit. So I know Bismarck has a new half marathon course for 2023. Well, and marathon course that I may try. I may go down to the Black Hills, but I'm hoping to run a half marathon this fall in the immediate future. A friend of mine and I did a Flakes of Fury fat tire bike race last January at Fort Stevenson. I don't know if race is the right word, but we did the course, and probably something in that realm again that we got out of our comfort zone that day. So I also last fall did a sort of bike packing trip out to Fort Lincoln with a friend, but I didn't have all the stuff, so I had to cheat a little bit. But now I'm ready to have the tent delivered, because I didn't have I couldn't fit that tent on my bike.
Yeah.
So, but now I'm set up where I can just put everything on my bike and go. So that's something that appeals to me, getting out and just having those types of experiences. Kind of, again, I kind of said I'd never sleep in a camper. Then we got a camper for the family, and now I'm thinking, I kind of like to sleep. I don't know why I want to sleep in a tent again, but just getting out and experiencing things, and being with people that also have those adventurous souls just really appeals to me. So those are a few things, and then we'll just see, what's around the next horizon. Who knows?
I love it. Tom, thanks so much for sharing some coffee.
Oh, love the coffee.
Thanks. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Brian Jackson with Mighty Missouri Coffee. With me is Nolan Johnson with Quantum Digital. So if you like how this sounds and looks, thanks to Quantum Digital, if you like the way that this smells and tastes, that's thanks to Mighty Missouri Coffee. Coffee to your door mightymissouri.com.